Thank you so much. This is an absolutely amazing event, an honor to be here. I'm going to start out actually with a little story, and it'll become very clear in a few minutes why I'm telling this story. When I was 24, a young man and out with friends, one night having a good time, one of the guys I was with got into a bit of an argument with another guy, a very big guy. And this led to a situation where we were followed outside. I was grabbed from behind. I was thrown onto the concrete. And my head bounced off the pavement. I ended up getting rushed to the hospital that night and received 2 life-saving operations to stop the bleeding in my brain. So I had a traumatic brain injury. I had to spend the next few months working with doctors and therapists to regain the ability to speak and to be able to just kind of regain the ability to really live a normal kind of life. But I was extremely lucky because I was able to recover, was able to get back into the workforce. And the interesting twist in all of this is that the job I took the next year was actually in the medical field. So I've spent the last 20 years working on medical technology, and more specifically, working on technology to help paralyzed folks regain movement, to help folks living with disabilities regain function that they've lost through either a serious injury to the brain or the spinal cord. We're even now working with people that have experienced a stroke. I think you can all think of someone, a loved one, a family member, a friend, a neighbor who has experienced one of these types of events or is living with one of these conditions. So today we're going to talk about some new technology, and I want everyone to be engaged, to use the word, and help spread the word about bioelectronic medicine, because we're now working to actually restore these kinds of functions in all of these conditions, and I'm going to tell you a few stories about that. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so let me just first kind of explaining, this is your nervous system, okay? We're talking about 100 billion neurons in the brain, 10 million neurons in the spinal cord alone, and then hundreds of thousands of nerves spread throughout your body. We've made 2 major discoveries that have led to bioelectronic medicine. One is that we can actually pinpoint different locations in the nervous system where we can stimulate electrically to actually not only restore function, we're discovering we can even treat disease. We can take someone who's experienced, say, rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease for years, and if we stimulate in the right place, we can actually reverse some of the conditions and actually almost restore that person back to a normal way of life. We're also, the second discovery is we've learned how to tap into different parts of the brain and actually decode signals. We can now tell what someone is actually thinking about when they want to actually move, let's say their arm or their hand, even years after, say, a spinal cord injury. And I'm going to show you about a young man who became the first person to actually do that just this year. So this is Ian. This is the young man. 4 years ago, he actually was out on a vacation with his family. He actually dove into the ocean, and a wave drove him into a sandbar, and he fractured his spinal cord. He was left with a C5 injury. This left him quadriplegic from about mid-chest down. He has no use of his hands, and then as you move down the body, obviously no movement, and he's lost sensory abilities as well. Ian volunteered for a study that we started several years ago to actually receive a brain implant in his motor area, a little thin strip on the side of your head, above your ear, and he is now actually beginning to regain movement by thinking about different specific hand and even individual finger movements, and we're decoding that information and we're rerouting those signals to his muscles, and he's able to actually take control of his arm, his hand again. So the way the system works is there's a tiny chip that we've developed that's put into the brain, and we actually use, it's interesting, a little device that actually shoots it into the brain. That sounds terrible, but we actually do it very, very carefully. And it is actually the best way to do it. It's kind of like, maybe yanking a sheet and, kind of a tablecloth out from underneath the, the glassware. That's actually the best way to put a brain implant into the brain. It's kind of like a bed of nails. If you do it slowly, you can actually cause some issues in terms of bleeding. But in this case, we put it in very quickly. We then seat it, and we receive all of these signals that are in the top middle portion of this slide. The trick is to take all of that information, and we're actually generating about a gigabyte of data every few minutes, but we're taking all of that information and we're deciphering it and decoding it into the colors you see on the right. Each of those colors, those little clusters as we call them, are actually individual thoughts. Ian is thinking about flexing, in this case, his wrist in different directions. We call it ulnar and radial deviation to the side, flexion, extension, and each finger actually represents colors in an additional, kind of a different version of that plot. And so now, Ian spent this last year coming every day to these sessions, spending hours thinking about all of these different movements and watching this hand on this computer screen, and we're collecting brain data the entire time. We learned through this past year how to decipher these signals, figure out exactly what he's thinking about, and then we converted those signals into kind of a language that the muscles could understand. Your spinal cord is not just a set of wires. Again, it has 10 million neurons. It's actually like a second brain. And can you still hear me? And so your spinal cord actually helps you do things like walk. When I'm walking across the stage, my brain says go, start and stop, but the spinal cord is actually taking care of the actual movements in the legs. As a place in your spinal cord I can stimulate right now, and you would watch your leg go through an entire cycle of walking by itself, without the brain even involved. So the brain is kind of like, upper management. It doesn't really know about the details of what's going on. Okay, so now I want to show you what Ian is able to do now. And this is something he told me he wanted to do at the very beginning of the study. See what he does. He's picking up a cup with one hand, taking a drink. Something we take for granted every day, but something Ian wanted to do, and now he's doing it. And now the final slide I want to show you. You may recognize this man, John Glenn, on the left. Next year I'll put Leland Melvin in this slide. But Ian is really, I think, the true pioneer in this photograph. In terms of medical history, he's made it this year. He's now paved the way for future patients. He is truly, I think, showing us all, if we put our mind to it, we can pretty much do anything. And I want to encourage everybody now to help kind of spread the word about what we're doing in terms of technology and helping the conditions that I mentioned. Again, think about loved ones, family members, and help us talk to government leaders. We're here in DC, so appropriate to say. Let's develop these technologies faster, let's get them approved, and let us get them out to the patients. Thank you.